Talk now.
I can't hear anything. I'm talking in the meeting.
I could hear you just then, Michelle.
That's okay. I was mucking around because I was trying to figure out how to get music playing while everyone was waiting to come in, but I couldn't figure it out. So I mucked around with all my settings and had to just take them back.
Just play it off your phone into your speaker.
I tried that. I should have tried it with I was trying with my headphones. Anyway, I couldn't make it work and it's now 1:30, so it's too late. I might give 2 more minutes for people to arrive. I've also frozen. Never mind. Hey people, I'm just going to give 1 more minute, give a few people a chance to join, and then we'll start at 1:32. And I did try and make background music work for you while you were waiting, but I couldn't make it work. Is there music playing? Someone said I like the music, very relaxing. I tried. Next meeting, next seminar, I'll have it sorted out. Ah,
I can hear it. It's very nice.
You can hear music now, Wendy?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
I can't hear it.
I can't hear it either. You must have music.
That's weird. Can anyone else hear it?
No, I can't even hear it. I haven't got it playing. Wendy, you've got something else going on there.
Maybe my speaker must be. I'll see if it's turned up super loud.
Well, I think we'll get started. So I will have music for you next time.
I like it.
Wendy's having her own private party. So thanks everyone so much for coming. My name's Michelle Dyer. I'm Assistant Director of Human Dimensions here at the Reef Authority. We have got some external colleagues joining us today, just for my Reef Authority colleagues, just so you know. So welcome to all our colleagues from outside the authority. Before we start any formal proceedings, I would like to acknowledge the country that I'm sitting on today. It's the country of the Bindal and Wulkurukaba people, and I'd like to pay my respects and honour their long connection to the land and their leaders, past, present and emerging. So we're really fortunate today to have the lovely Ben Ford join us. Ben is working at DECU, and he has a background in marine ecology and quantitative ecology in general. He's been at DECU since early 2022 when he joined the Environmental Economic Accounts team. And he was involved in the release of Australia's first national ecosystem account in 2022. And prior to working at DECU, Ben worked at the University of Western Australia, where he also completed his PhD on marine fish community ecology. So Ben today is going to talk to us about Australia's first national ocean ecosystem account, including a summary of accounts for the GBR Marine Park, mangrove, seagrass and saltmarsh ecosystems. And these accounts highlight blue carbon ecosystems and their vital role in climate mitigation and resilience. They were first published by the Australian Bureau of Statistics in 2 phases, so mangrove and seagrass accounts in August of 2022, and saltmarsh accounts with an update to the first phase, mangrove and seagrass accounts, in November 2022. And this ecosystem accounting done by DECU is also part of the EPBC Act review, which is now called the Nature Positive Plan. So just for everyone's information, this meeting is being recorded. So if you're not comfortable being seen or heard, then don't speak up. You can always contact us afterwards if that's the case. And with that, I'll just hand over to you, Ben. Thanks very much.
Thank you for the intro, Michelle. I'll just share my screen. And can everyone see that one?
Yeah, all good, Ben.
Yep, excellent, thank you. Yeah, thank you for the intro and thanks for joining us today. As Michelle said, I'm from the Environmental Economic Accounts team at DECU. I'm also joined by Chris Oakey from my team today, who will help. He works on the broader ecosystem accounting projects and will help me field any questions that might be more relevant to his work. And today's talk will just be summarising the National Ocean Ecosystem Account released in 2022 and using regions relevant to the Great Barrier Reef as a case study. I'll start by acknowledging the traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to land, waters and culture. We pay our respects to their elders past and present. I'm joining today from Menang country on South Coast WA. So the National Ocean Ecosystem Account was a collaborative work between ourselves and the ABS. It focused on blue carbon ecosystems, so specifically mangroves, seagrass, both subtidal and intertidal, and saltmarsh. It also reported on the services provided by these ecosystems, carbon sequestration and coastal protection against storm surge. And prior to the development of these accounts and during their creation, their development, we conducted stakeholder consultation to identify which aspects of the accounts would be most to include that would make the accounts most useful to end users. As Michelle mentioned, it was released in 2 phases. Mangroves and seagrass was released in August 22, and saltmarsh with just the intertidal seagrass was released in November that year. We also looked into kelp accounts, or we intended to also include kelp accounts for that, but we couldn't find data that was appropriate to report the extent of kelp at a national scale. So for those of you who aren't familiar with environmental economic accounts, the first step is to identify the extent of your ecosystem of interest in your area of interest. And if you are able to get a time series of that information, you can identify if your ecosystem is expanding or contracting or even shifting throughout the landscape. Then the second step is to measure the condition of that ecosystem. Again, if there's a time series, you can identify if the ecosystem is improving or deteriorating, or if there's spatial variability in the condition of this ecosystem. With those 2 pieces of information, you can then start measuring the services provided by the services these ecosystems provide. So for the ocean account, it was coastal protection against storm surge and carbon sequestration by these ecosystems. Following that, you can then identify the benefits provided by these ecosystems. So the number of people from the ocean account, it was the number of people and houses offered protection against storm surge, and also the ABS had a go at estimating the cost of replacing this service, not the mangroves themselves, but just the coastal protection aspect with a seawall. And so to basically reiterate that last slide, the ocean account included the extent of these ecosystems and the stocks of carbon held within each of these ecosystems. Condition was estimated via mangrove canopy cover, or where it was available, the density of seagrass meadows. And as I just mentioned, the services were the coastal protection, the kilometres of coastline that were protected, and the tons of carbon that was sequestered. And the benefits were the number of people and houses offered protection, and what it would cost to replace this this service with a seawall. This is an infographic. I'll just leave up for a moment. It's just summarising the kind of information that was included in the accounts, that was revealed by the release of these accounts. Just to kind of give you an idea of the information that can be obtained from national scale accounts. So today I will be focusing on areas that are relevant to the Great Barrier Reef. So the ocean account was released, the ABS released statistics at the national scale, at the Commonwealth waters scale, at state waters scale, and also at coastal sediment, primary coastal sediment compartments, which are the green polygons on this map. They're based on coastal and shallow water geomorphology. So the kind of, if you go around a large headland, you move into the next sediment compartment type thing. Future marine or ocean accounts will also be reporting at IMCRA regions, but for today I'll just be focusing on these sediment compartments. So this is the extent and condition of mangroves in the first 6 compartments. These graphs are split up into 2 slides per, there's 12 compartments, so 2 lots of 6. The darker green is greater than 80% canopy cover. Medium green is 50 to 80% canopy cover, and the light green is 20 to 50% canopy cover. The main thing that's demonstrating this is that the extent of these, the full extent of these mangroves in these compartments is fairly consistent over time. These graphs start in 1998 and end in 2021. And then for the next 6 compartments, you'll notice that they appear to be less dense. So I guess that's probably fairly, I'm not a mangrove expert, but I imagine that would suggest the more northern areas are more favourable to mangroves persisting. But again, even in the further south compartments, it's fairly obvious that the extent is fairly consistent over time. After each of my graph slides, I'll have just a brief summary like this. So it will basically just reiterate what I've just mentioned. And here is the condition. So the ABS reported the change in condition from one year to the next, basically as a major increase in canopy cover. It was if it went from 20 to 50% density to more than 80% density. It went up 2 steps. Increase in canopy cover was going up from 1 step. So either less than 20 to 50, or from 20 to 50 to 50 to 80, etc. There are a couple of instances you'll notice, like the Lockhart and Cape Grenville, where there's a massive decrease 1 year followed by basically the same amount increase the next year. That's likely to be an artifact of satellite imagery rather than something actually occurring on the ground. Similar for the more southern mangroves, the main feature observable in these graphs is the fact that the vast majority of these mangroves are staying consistent in their condition 1 year to the next. When this is the same data, but just the no change values removed. And then most noticeable feature in this, or at least for me, is the fluctuations from the kind of periods of increase to periods of decrease going through these plots, and similarly with the more southern ones. this was looked into just data exploration, and a nice relationship was found between these cycles and that of the Southern Oscillation Index, which is the measure, if you're not familiar with it, measure of the strength of El Nino, La Nina events. So in this instance, the accounts are showing us a nice, most likely natural cycle in changes in condition going through these mangroves. Also in this data, it can be noticed the darker green and the red is more prevalent in these northern mangroves than the southern mangroves, suggesting possibly another natural variability where it's more variable up in the further north. Yes, covered those. And so seagrass extent. The extent was, and the extent and the condition was, the extent was reported, the data was reported as upper and lower limits of the extent. So this in itself identifies as a data gap. We don't really know how much seagrass there is, but also, like I'll get to later, Innisfail, there's high variability in this data. This next plot is the same data, just with the y-axis compressed so that we can actually get a better idea of the values of the smaller fields. The main, aside from the Cape York compartment here, you can notice that most of the largest seagrass meadows tend to be further south in this, through this region. And also, as I said, there's lots of variability or unknown in this data, which identifies a data gap. There's also Innisfail has very high known variability in seagrass. One thing the accounts doesn't tell us is if this is natural phenology or anthropogenic impacts, or if it's just something where we've actually the seagrass is being meadowed. The seagrass has been monitored more frequently, so we've actually been able to measure that this variability exists. Yes. And so the Saltmarsh, when the ABS released the Saltmarsh, they didn't report, they reported the extent of Saltmarsh in each of these regions, but they didn't explicitly report on the condition of these ecosystems. Instead, they reported the proportion or percent of saltmarsh that was found in different land uses and let end users use that information as they will. But it does tell us that, not surprisingly, a large proportion of the saltmarsh is found in water land use category. And there's also a fair amount of it, particularly in Princess Charlotte Bay, that's found in nature conservation areas, whereas further south, much of the saltmarsh is found in either grazing modified pastures or grazing native vegetation. And so carbon stocks are largely a function of the extent of the ecosystem in that area. The larger the ecosystem, the larger the carbon stocks they will have. But what's evident from this part of the data is, with the exception of Cape York, Melville and Prince Charlotte Bay, mangroves is the ecosystem that contains them, has the largest carbon stocks, whereas in Cape York and Melville, seagrass ecosystem contains more carbon stocks, and it's saltmarsh in Prince Charlotte Bay. Carbon sequestration follows a very similar pattern, where Cape York and Melville have large sequestration provided through seagrass, and Princess Charlotte Bay has large saltmarsh carbon sequestration. So coastal protection wasn't reported it was only reported nationally and at the state level, so I can't actually provide information on how much protection was offered at these compartment levels. The algorithm the ABS used to estimate the length of coastline offered protection was fairly simplistic. They didn't have a lot of time to work on it. I don't think coastal protection will be in next year's account release, but it is the algorithm to estimate length of coastline offered protection is being refined and improved upon for future releases. But give you an idea of the kind of extent of coastline that was estimated to be offered coastal protection. And I should also mention that the coastline protected by mangrove and saltmarsh, they're not exclusive. So some areas are offered protection by both and they overlap. What was interesting in this, though, is that for the extent of coastline protected in Queensland relative to the number of people and houses, there was more coastline in northern WA and Northern Territory with protection, but less houses just because the population density isn't the same in those areas. So for those of you who aren't, hopefully this has demonstrated some of these uses of accounts. So the baseline information and also data gaps. So one thing that I've very much learned on this job is when you're trying to compile accounts, it very much shows you what data we don't have. They also provide the ability to track an ecosystem extent and condition over time when the time series data is available. And because they put things on a common playing field, you can compare ecosystems among regions, or an ecosystem among times, and also again, as in the carbon examples here, you can compare ecosystems between regions and among ecosystems. And also it starts to give us an idea on what benefits these ecosystems are providing us just by the ecosystem existing. And the data used to generate accounts as well as the accounts themselves can help inform spatial can help inform management and conservation activities and decisions. I will let Chris cover this one as this is more his field than myself.
Thanks, Ben. Yeah, as Ben was mentioning, the information you're just saying came out of the 2022 Ocean Ecosystem Account, which was the first national scale ecosystem account Australia had produced. So in February 2025, we'll be releasing a comprehensive ecosystem account that includes all the realms, so not just oceans and coasts, but also terrestrial and freshwater. So yeah, this will have, as Ben was laying out, the extent, condition, and services for all of those realms. It won't be. It's going to be effectively a first attempt, if that makes sense. So we'll be iterating in subsequent years, but we will be, as the timeline at the bottom outlines, we will be producing and releasing annual updates to these accounts, so starting in 2025, then 2026, 2027, 2028, etc. And so in the first release, from an oceans perspective, we'll have marine extent building on work that's been done with nests and parks from all the way from the coastline out to the edge of the exclusive economic zone, or EEZ. We'll also be combining that on the common raster with information on terrestrial and freshwater and coastal ecosystems. We'll also have some condition information, noting that we are still in the process of developing a more comprehensive way of assessing ocean and coastal condition. So that'll be sea surface temperature anomaly for the oceans, and mangrove canopy cover and adjacent land use intensity for the coasts. And for our marine services, we'll have fish caught in Commonwealth water as our first service, and that will expand to cover the states and territories waters in subsequent releases. And we're also looking at what priority ecosystem services exist. So yeah, please let us know what ecosystem services you'd like to see. Yeah, so I'm happy to link through an information paper that our partners in the ABS released last month on what will be in those accounts, and yeah, pass back to Ben. I'll put that in the chat.
Thanks, Chris. Right, so before I open to questions, I was Michelle and Cindy suggested that I could give you a brief walkthrough on the Environmental Economic Accounts dashboard. I might field questions if there are any first, and then finish off with the walk through the dashboard to use up time we have left, if that sounds reasonable.
Yeah, that sounds fine to me. Ben, thanks so much, Ben and Chris, for that whiz-bang tour. It's all super interesting. There is one question in the chat already from Kay. Kay, did you just want to ask your question, or you want me to read it out?
Thanks. I won't turn on my camera because we're having some connection issues here at the moment. Thanks, that was really interesting, and the update is great to know, especially what is coming forward and looking for those eco services ideas and things like that. It's really exciting stuff. I just had a quick question. When you're talking about the mangroves, not much of coastal mangroves are included in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, and the tidal slide had Gabrumpa mangroves. So I was just wondering, you're looking at entirety of Queensland coastal mangroves and Gabrumpa mangroves. So mangroves in Gabrumpa Marine Park, as in the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, mainly consist of the mangrove islands, whereas the Queensland coastal doesn't actually enter into our Commonwealth Marine Park.
Right. Yeah, so there is the potential for the marine park to be in the dashboard, which I'll get to. I don't think we'll ever get to the point where the ABS will release accounts just for the marine park, but it may be included on the dashboard, so you'll be able to generate accounts for that in the future, possibly. This talk was basically just purely using the data that was straight from the accounts that the ABS released. So this was without any GIS background or anything like that. You can just get the numbers straight off the ABS website and find this information. So somewhat I tailored existing data to focus on the coastline associated with the barrier reef, I suppose would be a better way to have put it. If this,
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
Oh yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just checking because of course we have that distinction, and I'm always after specific details that I can use to enhance the support for that whole coastal / inshore region. So no, that was pretty much expected. Lee, were you adding to that in some way?
Kay, I'll just jump in before you, Lee, to say, Kay, that whether the line on the map is the marine park or not, obviously those mangrove accounts are still going to help, and the Saltmarsh accounts, it's still affecting the reef, obviously. So I take
obvious,
your point,
yep.
But yeah, so I think you still can use it, even if the line on the map is going around it. Lee, you had a question. Someone got there. Oh, is that your microphone, Lee? Background noise.
Yeah, I've got Justin in the background there. It's more of a statement, and it's probably pretty obvious, but most of the variability that we find with the seagrass within the marine park area and the inshore areas is related to flooding and cyclones. Now, the data that you've presented certainly had lots of variability in there, but a lot of the changes can be explained very simply by the loss of seagrass meadows in that inshore area associated with cyclones or flooding. I think it would be relatively easy to look at that covariate relationship of those two with what you're reporting to cover off on it. And the other thing with that is also I'm guessing that the data that's being used is only for the inshore seagrass. It's not taking into account any deep water seagrass monitoring, given that there's very little of that being undertaken. So it's just a caveat around what you're necessarily describing as seagrass. May be important to have that caveat there, because just as an example, the Innisfail graph that you had there had a huge variability. The entire inshore seagrass meadow in Marulian Harbour disappeared following a cyclone, and it hasn't recovered 5 years later. So that is just an example of where the accounting can be explained by the natural variability that's occurred through cyclonic events. So it's just that caveat around grouping things on a large scale and just grabbing information. ABS did this for water quality and using CSIRO modelling, they did the same thing. And the numbers that came out of it didn't match the numbers that had been collected through long-term water quality monitoring in situ. So the model hadn't necessarily been calibrated to reflect those values. So that's just a caution that I put forward to you, that other processes that I've been involved in through the ANZAC water quality guidelines, they used a model which wasn't necessarily calibrated to reflect the reality. And so that's just a caution there as well.
Yeah. Most of the seagrass data, the subtidal seagrass data, was that's contained on CMAP. But folks such as Tropwater at James Cook provided their monitoring data to the ABS. So I couldn't tell you comprehensively what data the ABS used for that. This again was just what was reported in the accounts. But no, thank you. That makes perfect sense to explain why the seagrass is that variable.
Thanks. Do we have any other questions from the floor, or we'll get Ben to walk us through the dashboard? Yep, Warren.
Thanks, guys. Just a quick question on these carbon sequestration stuff. I might have missed what you were saying about how you treated that sequestration data in this accounting. But do you take into account, or for the future perhaps, will you take into account the massive variability in sequestration between different types of seagrass habitat, mangrove habitat, etc., because there's such a variability there according to sediment type and below ground biomass.
I think
sequestration rates.
They did differentiate between tropical and temperate seagrass. I think mangroves was just the one. Chris, I always get them mixed up. Did they use blue cam or full cam? Can you remember?
Yeah, in the 2022 release, they used blue cam modelling. But for the 2020, for the 2025 upcoming release, we'll be using the estimates in full cam, just to be consistent across the way the terrestrial and marine carbon is calculated. But yeah, it was blue cam for 2022.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you. Warren, can you just turn your microphone off? Do we have any other questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one thing, is that those accounts and to the GBR that Ben just presented to us, it's the first time we have them presented, so it's the first time we actually see the data as the authority. I think it's a great we have some great opportunity to discuss those further. So as well as discussing the details of what might not be exact, etc., it's great to start thinking of how we can interpret them and how we can use them or not use them, and where they might be used well. So keen to continue those conversations across the authority to make use of what we have, because we will obviously never have very detailed data for everything that we're trying to manage in the GBR. So if we can make use of what we have access to, I think it's a good step forward. So Lee and Kay, people like that, it would be great to start having detailed conversation around how this kind of information could be used in the example of, for example, the Southern Plan of Management that we're trying to work on, and other type of management decisions that are currently in discussion.
Thanks, Cindy. Lee, you had another question?
Yeah, we have legislation.
In terms of the valuing the ecosystem services, you put up a couple of examples there. I'm guessing that you're looking to move beyond just those couple of estimates that you've got there in valuing the total services provided. And just a second part to that question is around, has there been any thoughts with regards to how this information might be used in terms of environmental offsets and valuing those environmental offsets or developments that may occur in those areas?
Are you right to do what services are coming up, Chris?
Yeah, I'm happy to have a go with that. So yes, we are. We will be looking at a larger suite of services in 2025. In general, the system of environmental economic accounts that we're implementing here wants exchange values if possible, so not necessarily existence values or welfare values. The first preference is for exchange values. So, for example, with carbon, we've got the ACU pricing system, which is quite likely to get used as the way to value the carbon that's sequestered and stored. Likewise, but yeah, there's also a lot of care that needs to be taken with ecosystem services to make sure that you're valuing the ecosystem contribution to that service. So, for example, I know that that Sean Pascoe, who led the ecosystem service for Commonwealth Fisheries, put a lot of work into making sure that we were attributing the correct proportion of the catch value to the ecosystem service, and that varied wildly by fishery, and it's quite interesting to read the process that goes in there. So yeah, there will be a few services in 2025. It won't be a comprehensive list. If you go to CICES or to the SEA guidance, that there are a lot of services that are both provisioning services, maintenance services, and cultural services. So yeah, there's a big suite of services, and we're only taking the first crack now, and we're looking to produce a more comprehensive suite. And what I was just trying to say with that anecdote about fishing is that there is quite a bit of work that goes into making sure that we are attributing an accurate value to the ecosystem contribution to those services, and that will be a case by case for each and every service. As for offsets, we have been speaking to the EPBC area or the future EPA about their potential uses for this information, but yeah, I can't say anything firm about offsets. It hasn't been a big subject of our discussions with them or any of our other colleagues in the department. It has focused primarily on the ecological data and the ability to track the change in those metrics over time more than offsets.
Yeah, if we take islands for an example.
Thanks, Chris. Could you just explain what exchange values are as opposed to other types of values that you mentioned?
Yeah, it's a shame. My colleague is an environmental economist who's much better placed to explain this than me, but she's not here today. So we have one
online though, so she can correct you if you get it wrong.
Okay, fantastic. That's a relief. So an exchange value is if there is a market for something, what is the value people are prepared to pay in that market? So in a carbon example, we can think that a welfare value for carbon might be, computing, how much is a ton of carbon dioxide not being released into the air? What's that worth to to the world as a whole, whereas an exchange value be if there is a market for carbon. In the case of ACCUs, what are people currently willing to pay for that carbon, if that makes sense? So in terms of not looking, Anthea, if you want to put me out of my misery, and see if that was close. Pity Sophie isn't here.
I think Di Jarvis is online too, and Jeremy. But my understanding is that it's the price exchanged in the market. That's how they determine the value. So it's got to be exchanged in the market to get an exchange value. Happy for others to contribute.
So it isn't always possible because, not every ecosystem service is actively traded in a market. But you've got to kind of use some methodologies to derive that for some of the services which don't have an obvious market.
Yeah, it's tricky. I think for us general non-economists, it's a lot to wrap your head around talking about these kinds of values. I think you had your explanation at the start, Ben, it's trying to make it so that we can compare apples with apples, basically. Is that a fair, very non-technical summary of why you would undertake something like these ecosystem accounts?
I see that as one part of it all. An advantage of using the account methodology and approach means that you can compare different ecosystems and regions and times and countries and see how you compare these things, but also it provides us with general information on how the ecosystem's going, which I see as just as important.
I actually had a question about when you're looking at change over time, because if the records only go from 1998 to 2024, how do you know you're capturing, say, a cycle of change? I mean, there's obviously, as Lee was mentioning, the different weather events, but I genuinely don't know. I'm just throwing that out there because when I saw that data time frame, like so often when you look at climate change data, like temperature records, for example, they're like, well, we started recording in 1900 or whatever it was, and so we can track change over time. That's not just necessarily due to natural cycles. So I just had a general inquiry, like if the data period is that long, 26 years, is there meaning behind that, or what assumptions are made, or?
I guess I would have to say that you can only infer from what is included in the data. There may be longer term cycles that the data is not going to capture. So that mangrove data is part of a Geosciences mangrove data, which comes from the Global Mangrove Watch. And I suppose it starts in 1988 because that's when the satellite imagery, that's when they can backcast it to. But yeah, I mean, my answer would be that I suppose you can only observe the cycles that are there in the data. If there's longer term cycles, you're not going to know there until you've got the sufficient time series.
Yeah, exactly. That's kind of why I was asking. Yeah. So I guess you don't know what you don't know, right?
Yeah.
Chris, go ahead.
Oh, just to tack on to that, the CR, so the environmental economic accounts are kind of an extension to the system of national accounts more broadly. So the figures like GDP, employment, a lot of these figures we take for granted on the economic side, and so they've had the luxury of running for a century, and much like the first few releases that would have come out of those accounts wouldn't necessarily have had the advantage of a long-term trend. So we're trying to set up something enduring, and obviously you don't want to oversell what you can do with a limited time series. But if these accounts have been running in a more comprehensive form for decades, that's that's ultimately the long-term ambition. It's not necessarily a one and done study that you know, you hope to draw every inference you can out of that, if that makes sense. It's about building something that's meaningful and enduring, and you know, getting the time series as you can, because as Ben said, those satellites have only been in the sky for so long, but we expect them to stay there, and we'll get a longer time series as we go.
Great, yes, thank you. If there's no more questions from the floor, we could have a quick look at the dashboard, Ben, unless anybody has any more questions. I can't see any hands up. Or if any of our economists felt they wanted to add any information, noting that we are not generally economists on this in this seminar right now. Contextual information always welcome. No. All right, take it away, Ben.
Yeah, so I'll admit that I'm a bit rusty with this. I haven't used it for quite a while, but this is the Environmental Economic Accounting dashboard. This is when if you Google DQ EEA dashboard, this is what you'll find. There is a quick tour with how I strongly recommend using this the first time you open it up, which gives you guides on what each of these tabs will allow you to do or show you. But basically, this dashboard allows you to generate accounts following the same as what the ABS has provided. Also, you can draw your own bespoke polygon and have accounts generated for that. I think there is a maximum size on that one though. But to focus in on where we were today, so these blue regions are the sediment compartments I was talking about. If you hover over one, it shows you what accounts are available for that point. So at that point, we can get national accounts, state water accounts, the Burdekin Whitsundays primary sediment compartment, or the Great Barrier Reef Marine Park, which is only one section of it. So it will generate these accounts on the fly for that area. Land cover or ocean, there's no mangroves out there, not surprisingly. If we go to this one, so it gives you brief summaries of key points in the data that's available. And again, there's the key points. The actual data itself, but this is the same numbers that I generated those graphs off, which I had in my in the presentation. And again, same kind of graph as what I had developed, shown. Similar, there's for each of these, again, how it divides up amongst those land uses. There's also intertidal and subtidal seagrass. So the subtidal seagrass data comes from CMAP. The intertidal seagrass was a remotely sensed modeled product that we procured for these accounts. And it shows us how much is in that compartment and compartments that are in the same region. Other aspects that there are to this, you can add reference layers, so either administrative boundaries, environmental or ecological boundaries, protected areas, and these aren't actually, not all of these can be reported at, but you can use them as a guide to where you're looking. So if we want to add IBRA regions, we can see where they are. it also allows mangrove extent change, sediment compartments, and we'll just include the major one. And it shows us relatively how much these mangroves, the canopy cover has changed for these reporting regions on that time frame. Excuse me. Highlights where, so where is the major increases? I think this one just shows the top 3 or 4 or so. Sorry, as I said, I am rusty with this dashboard, but it allows you to zoom in and identify where the greatest change occurred for that time of interest. And the other one is compare years, which land use, we'll go mangrove again. So if we'll go between 2021, on the left of the slider is the mangrove extent in 2000. On the right is the mangrove extent and density for 2021, and the slider will show you where it's changed. My internet's not the world's best, so there's a bit of a stall on it. But yeah, you can see between your 2 years of interest where these things have changed. I think there's also, we'll focus on just ocean. I think that's about it for off the top of my head. Is there anything else, Chris, that I might have missed that you can think of?
No.
No.
I think
I think that's
yeah.
most of the functions very briefly covered in the dashboard. It will be updated when the new accounts come out sometime soon after the new accounts are released in February. The additional data will be added to this dashboard and be made available.
That is just awesome, Ben. That's such a funky dashboard. So many functions. I don't know if people who don't look at dashboards a lot probably don't realise. I'm like, wow, look at what this dashboard can do. So good work, team. All the people that worked on that. It's amazing. Did anybody have any questions around the dashboard specifically? Lots of rousing round of applause was happening, I should say, after that demonstration. No questions. I just want to encourage my internal colleagues. Oh, yeah, Warren's got a question. Go ahead.
Criteria for determining that western landward boundary of the sedimentary regions, and how do you filter out what's oceanic, or blue carbon habitat versus not?
To be honest, I couldn't tell you what the inner boundary of the inland boundary of the sediment compartments is based on. We ended up, they started being used because mangroves in particular were troublesome in that all of the reporting boundaries that we could find, either they stopped at the high tide line. So the marine ones stopped at the high tide line, the terrestrial ones stopped at the other side of the high tide line, and mangroves were both sides of that. So this was the only boundary that existed that we could find that covered either side of the high tide line. They do go a fair way out to sea, particularly in your region. But to be honest, I couldn't tell you what defines the inland boundary on them. I'm sorry.
Because it does vary. I know the Coorong goes all the way up to the Menindee Lakes, yeah. So they do follow waterways. That one goes particularly far in, but I could probably pull up a map of the sediment compartments if it might be useful.
Thanks, Chris. I've got a feeling as well that if you play around on the DQ website and the various reports, I seem to remember being in an early presentation where they discussed the sediment boundary. So I wonder if it's tucked in the appendix of one of those reports somewhere. We do have a question in the chat from Ro. She's asking, is there a location on the dashboard where we can find metadata or information about the different data sets so that we can understand limitations / spatial extent of the data sets? And
yes.
Ben goes, yes, here's one I prepared earlier.
Which one was it? There is, I know that somewhere in here there is where the data can be found, but I can't find it at the moment. Yeah, so as I said, these are the ones where the ABS has generated environmental economic accounts at. Folks have requested these, and you can generate your own accounts for these regions. Is the data included in this? No, that's just the regions. I'm sure that there was information somewhere. Maybe it's on the startup page. There might be a link to where the data sources are. There is, in my presentation, there is a link to the sediment compartments. I'm sure that link would also contain at least information describing them better than I did, or links to where that information could be found. But I'm surprised that
I think there might have been when you actually generate the account and get some of the graphs on the side, then
yes,
you have
that's
access to the data there. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. DA Mangrove, CMAP, SEA guidelines, seagrass. That's interesting. It doesn't. No, it's the same. I'm seriously surprised that there isn't a link to describe the various boundaries. I'll have a look into that, see if I can find it, and I'll let you know if I can find where on the dashboard that information is or should be.
Okay, thanks, Ben. And maybe, yeah, that's something can feed into the development as it goes. We're nearly out of time. I just wanted to encourage my Reef Authority colleagues. I am not an economist, and I always find some of the economistic stuff I need a lot more explanation to actually wrap my head around what it's for and what it does. So if you want to have further conversations, Cindy and I are here, and we know lots of economists, so we can always pass you to them for more information. But I just want to thank Ben and Chris for coming to present to us today and sharing all that information, and we will share your slide pack with those that came, and we'll be talking to you again soon, I hope. So thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And thanks everyone for coming along, and please don't hesitate to reach out, and the recording of this will be made available. So if there's any of your colleagues you think would benefit from seeing this, please pass it on. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your